Well, a warm good afternoon to everybody. And if you don't know me, my name is Vishwas Satka. I'm an academic at Wits University. I head up a project which has contributed to this process around developing a climate justice charter. I also chair the board of the Cooperative and Policy Alternatives Center, and I'm an activist in the South African Food Sovereignty Campaign. And through that platform, we have through the activism of that platform for the past 6 years, we've been able to kind of work on this charter with many, many people, communities across the country. Now, the question of climate justice is something we must unpack because we're calling this a climate justice charter. Climate change is the most difficult and dangerous challenge we face as a species. And climate justice means that we are addressing this problem from the standpoint of those that are not responsible for this problem, but will be facing the greatest harms. So in other words, we put the most vulnerable front and center in our policy thinking, in our conception of the just transition, so that they don't carry the burden of what is coming. Now, in developing this charter, we've been informed by the most cutting edge climate science globally and in our country. We've worked with the leading climate scientists in South Africa, and they have they've informed how we think about the climate problem. In doing that, we are speaking to various approaches to the climate challenge. We are speaking against those who talk about it as though it's the end of the world, because it is not the end of the world. It is about a dramatic shift in the Earth system, but it doesn't mean that there's a date for when the human species expires. It's a very complex problem and a complex process. And that means that there's also room for human beings and human societies to solve this problem. We're also speaking against those who suggest that this problem is just too big and too overwhelming to deal with. And therefore, we should be in denial, or we should just ignore this problem. So we are challenging that because this problem has roots, and the roots really lie in the way of life of the rich, the affluent. They are the ones that are consuming the most resources on our planet. They are the ones that have historically polluted, etc. So we need to solve that problem. And if we solve that problem, we will be solving the climate crisis. We're also speaking against those who believe that, well, there are solutions on the table, green growth, more green policies, etc. So you just add a rhetoric of green and therefore all's well. We are speaking against that because those policies and those approaches don't go to the heart of the problem. So, where does this climate justice charter come from? And it comes from various places. The first place that it comes from is struggle. So I mentioned 6 years ago, we set up the Food Sovereignty Campaign. And one of the first issues that we tackled head on was the hunger crisis in this country. And that's a crucial place from where this charter and this campaign comes from. A hunger tribunal with the Human Rights Commission, a bread march in 2016, and various other interventions. It comes from a place of need in many, many poor and working class communities for water. And so water stressed communities have always been front and center in how we've been thinking about the climate problem. Imalashleni, Drought Speak Out, 2016, various meetings with drought affected communities and working with them and so on. It comes from a place also of confronting the powerful, of confronting the food corporations who are pushing up food prices during our drought. It comes from a place of confronting the Johannesburg Stock Exchange and protesting outside of that. It comes from a place of confronting our media and attempting to occupy the Sunday Times office, although we never succeeded. It comes from a place of going to the press ombud, of going to the SANEF offices and asking and demanding that they mainstream climate news. It comes from a place also of demanding that the state president in 2018, after the UN put out its most important scientific study on climate change, where we called upon the president, over 65 organizations, trade unions, and others, saying, convene an emergency sitting of parliament to discuss the science of climate change and what it means for our policies and the just transition. We were ignored. So the charter comes from there. The charter also comes from a place of dialogue, of listening to the needs and the interests of various sections of South African society, sitting with workers and trade unions to try and understand what do they want so that we can bring about the decarbonization of our society. What do youth and children feel and want right now that will solve this problem? What will the faith-based communities want? And how do they understand it from the standpoint of their wisdom and philosophies and so on? Where do environmental justice and social justice organizations stand, and what do they offer as solutions? So the charter comes from this place of dialogue, and it means that a child can take the charter to a school principal. It can take the charter to a teacher. A worker can take the charter to a factory owner or a mine owner and say, this is our conception of climate justice and the just transition. The charter comes from a place also of learning from our climate scientists, of taking the science very, very seriously, and ensuring that guides the urgency of our activism. It also comes from learning from international experiences. For 500 years, the global South has been living a civilizational crisis. So it comes from learning from indigenous communities. It comes from learning from feminists in the global South that have been at the front lines of a lot of this crisis. It comes from learning also from children that have woken up our planet over the past few years. The charter also comes from a place of deep concern and love for humanity and non-human life. So our state president on Monday basically mentioned that climate is something on the agenda of his government. They are passing a new adaptation strategy, and all of us should, of course, take heed of this, that the government is serious. Now, this doesn't add up for us in terms of where we are standing. The government is still keeping us coal addicted. It is still pushing for offshore extraction of oil and gas. It is still about industrial carbon-based farming. It is still about a globalized, globally competitive economy, and so on and so on. So we are saying here today to the president and through the charter that let's move away from the hypocrisy now. This is a very, very serious problem, and we have to address the roots of this problem. Now, at the same time, COVID-19 is hitting, and we can see where this government is coming short. We can see failing hospitals, communities are struggling with water issues, the lack of PPE across most parts of this economy, and so on. And so the government really has a lot to answer for. Corruption is rampant, okay? And so we acknowledge the calls made by trade unions for resistance on this platform right now for PPE. We acknowledge the calls made by communities for their water needs to be met. We acknowledge the calls made by parts of civil society to stand up against the corruption. So if we were to really think about the Climate Justice Charter in that context, in the context of COVID-19, it is offering a way forward to the multiple crises we are living through. For those that have water needs, it calls for democratizing the water commons and making it available. For those that have lost income, it is calling for a universal basic income grant, not just an incrementalist one, a substantive income grant that is livable for most people. For those that have lost jobs, it is calling for climate jobs and much, much more. So in other words, the Climate Justice Charter is speaking to the multiple crises of our society. The big challenge for us is to embrace its homegrown vision and its aspirations and to build a powerful movement, more powerful even than the anti-apartheid movement. It is only going to be people's power that is going to bring about the transformation envisaged in the Climate Justice Charter. Amandla, thank you.
Hi, everyone. So the next session is a recording of youth reading out the charter. So I'm not going to say much more now. I'm just going to share my screen. And these are youth that have been with us throughout the process, some who came in at different points, and yeah. So I'm just going to share my screen.
For climate justice now. As Africans, we live together on a vast and beautiful continent where the human story began. All of us are linked to the first human who walked upright, dreamed, thought, and coexisted with plants, animals, rivers, oceans, and forests. Today, this common humanity and its future is in serious danger. South Africa cannot ignore this challenge. The continued use of oil, gas, and coal to power our economy and society is making our world unlivable for all. The earth is being damaged by the system that puts profits before life. Every year, temperatures are rising with disastrous consequences, with a 1 degree Celsius increase in planetary extreme weather shocks, including droughts, floods, wildfires, tornadoes, heat waves, ecosystem collapse, sea level rise, together with major stresses on the Earth's systems. We are sad because a future with a stable climate is being lost. Our recent drought has taught us that lesson. We are angry because our rulers are not listening. The inequality and suffering of our people, including during the COVID-19 pandemic, has worsened. Yet, we are hopeful because climate science is on our side. Like the science of COVID-19, climate science is calling for caring action now. This charter is a call to all who care about human and non-human life to act together in advancing a plural vision of people's dreams, alternatives, and desires for a deep, just transition.
Mines, refineries, waste incinerators, airlines, cement industries, and cars have brought pollution, illness, poisons, and suffering into our communities. Chemical waste and export agriculture contributes to various diseases, yet we have rallied. With lessons learned about these harms and the importance of life-enabling commons, land, water, biodiversity, energy, earth systems, and cybersphere, we continue to advance our commitment to justice, anchored in people's power. Hence, we consciously choose to end the war with nature. More climate shocks and ecological crises will result in more suffering and more pandemics. For the majority, particularly workers, the poor, people with disabilities, landless, and the vulnerable, these are not simply natural disasters, but failures of leadership. As we defend the web of life and live with climate breakdown, we seek to end race, class, gender, and ecological injustice. We cannot let grassroots women and children be the shock absorbers of this crisis. Like before and during COVID-19, invisible care work in households and sacrifices by women in poor communities contributes to blunting the edge of suffering, while male dominance and violence continues. A carbon-free society and effective life-supporting systems mean emancipation for all, including for future generations. From this ecocidal system, the struggle of our time and our historical task as South Africans, as humans and as part of the wider living Earth community.
Culture of the Charter. This charter aims to 2.1 advance an awareness that we thrive and coexist on one planet. Earth is a common home for all species. This we seek to perform our role and responsibilities as guardians of our planet's ecosystems and the delicate web of our life support. Inspire a break for the thinking that caused the crisis and that reinforces the obsession with growth, progress, and domination. The power of humanity is constrained by the limits, cycles, tripping points, and boundaries of all ecosystems. More of the same thinking that harms Earth is forcing it to react with a power we cannot match. 2.3. Reconnect with all Earth-centered conception of what it means to be human. Nature is endless, and we are just one small part of it. We have to appreciate that every element of the ecosystem has an intrinsic value and must be respected.
Deepen cooperation. We thrive most as humans when we express solidarity, share life slowly are free, affirm our needs and preserve the foundations of our life world. The time of challenge and end selfish, greedy, competitive, violent, and conquering conception of the human has arrived. Overcome the crisis of corporate captured political leadership, which is incapable of thinking beyond the short term. Business as usual. Games and which fails to understand the root causes of the problems. We reject their false solutions that prolong the use of carbon and perpetuate the unjust life-destroying system. Strengthen our democracy, constitution and transformative constitutionalism by claiming our rights and building united people's power. And we confront the climate emergency and worsening socio-ecological crisis.
Section 3, Principles for Deep Just Transitions. Every community, village, town, city, and workplace has to advance the deep just transition to ensure socio-ecological transformation. The following principles shall guide the alternatives, plans, and processes towards a deep just transition in our society. Number 1, climate justice. Those least responsible must not be harmed or carry the cost of climate impacts. Hence, the needs of workers, the poor, the landless, people with disabilities, grassroots women, children, and vulnerable communities have to be at the center of the deep just transition. The benefits of socio-ecological transformation must be shared equally. Number 2, social justice. Climate justice is social justice, confronting all forms of discrimination and oppression as it relates to race, class, gender, sex, and age to secure climate and social justice. Number 3, ecocentric living. To live simply, slowly, and consciously in an ecocentric way, which recognizes the sanctity of all life forms, our interconnections, and enables an ethics of respect and care. Number 4, participatory democracy. All climate and deep just transition policies must be informed by the voices, consent, and needs of all people, especially those facing harm.
3.5, socialized ownership. In workplaces and communities, people's power must express itself through democratic control and ownership, including through democratic public utilities, cooperatives, common and communal ownership, and participatory planning, including participatory budgeting in towns and cities to ensure collective management of life, enabling commons and systems. 3.6, international solidarity. Everyone's struggle is a shared struggle to sustain life. In the context of worsening climate shocks, international solidarity is essential to the deep, just transition as it serves to unite all who are struggling for emancipation and for a post-carbon world. 3.7, decoloniality. Colonial, neo-colonial, and imperial domination are driving us towards extinction. This is based on the worship of extractivism, technology, finance, violence, and markets. We will actively dealing from this system as we affirm an emancipatory relationship between humans with non-human nature, rooted in our history, culture, knowledge, and the wider struggle of the oppressed on the planet Earth. 3.8, intergenerational justice. Care for our planetary commons and ecosystems is crucial for intergenerational justice to secure a future for our children, youth, and those yet not born.
Section 4, Systemic Alternatives for Transformative Change. We face many crises, but the climate crisis is the most dangerous. Through addressing the climate crisis, which affects everything, we can also advance solutions to all socio-ecological crises and more generally end war with nature. Systemic alternatives are necessary to address the causes of climate change, its risks and pressures for systems collapse. There are people's alternatives to fossil fuels, which can meet our basic need, enhance our capacity to deal with climate disasters, and prepare us to regenerate life-supporting systems. Such systemic alternatives have been imagined and are part of our people's struggles to decarbonize societies now as part of the deep just transition. We are committed to advancing such alternatives and democratic systemic reforms from below. 4.1. Democratic and deep just transition plans. Top-down approaches to the deep just transition assume people cannot think for themselves and do not have answers. Together, every community and workplace needs to develop a deep just transition plan. This should be done in a democratic manner to enable an energy transition to decarbonize whilst meeting essential needs and advancing systemic alternatives, goals and principles as set out in this charter. 4.2, socially owned and community-based renewable energy through a rapid phase out of fossil fuels. Our dependence on coal, oil, and gas has to be ended as it is accelerating climate breakdown, ultimately leading to an unlivable world. Nuclear energy is dangerous and costly. Instead, we will advance socially owned and community-based renewable energy systems such as solar, wind, hydro, and tidal power, supported by participatory budgeting and incentives such as feed-in tariffs for our workplaces, homes, and communities. Such energy technologies must be industrialized in South Africa using renewable energy. Efficient use of energy and technology will be crucial in the transition. Divestment from fossil fuels and an end to fossil fuel subsidies and an end to extraction, such as fracking, more coal mines, and offshore extraction, are imperative. All big energy generators, such as Eskom and Sasol, have to commit to deep, just transition plans to secure the interests of workers, affected communities, and future generations.
4.3. Feed ourselves through food sovereignty. The current industrial food system produces hunger, uses water inefficiently, destroys nature, releases carbon, and is generally unhealthy. Commercial fishing has destroyed marine ecosystems and undermined the rights of subsistence fishers. Every community must prioritize small-scale agroecological farming to meet local needs. The right to food must give food producers, small-scale subsistence fishers, informal traders, and consumers the power over their own food common systems to ensure that culturally appropriate and nutritious food is available to all. Moreover, biodiversity, control of seeds, and resources for production need to affirm the importance of indigenous knowledge, local markets, control of the water commons, the eco-social function of land, and good health. Big farms need to be deconcentrated to ensure land justice, but in a manner that is fair, strengthens reconciliation, and builds solidarity. 4.4, democratize the water commons. Water is controlled by a few, while many are in desperate need. Industrial farms, mines, coal-generated electricity, sugar and timber plantations are some of the major users of water. As a public good, water needs to be conserved by all, and it must be protected from pollution. Furthermore, water use has to be democratically planned and effectively regulated, while affirming citizens' rights to consume the scarce and precious resource. Water and sanitation infrastructure must be upgraded, managed, and monitored to ensure efficient use. Water savings from phasing out coal generation and big industrial-scale farming will enhance the water commons. A water-conscious society has to be promoted. 4.5, enjoy life through working less. Work for everyone as a means to survive and earn income is no longer possible. Unemployment, low-paying jobs, and long working hours harm society. In a heating world, working hours must be reduced, at least to a 4-day week. Decent, zero-carbon climate jobs must be guaranteed and supported by collective, values-based and eco-centric approaches to production, consumption, financing, and ways of living through the solidarity economy. Such an economy is based on needs and democratizes economic power. Together with a universal basic income grant system, or UBIG, complementing existing public goods, all workers can be protected in the transition required, and society more generally will have a cushion. The UBIG will generally promote human cultural flourishing in a post-work society. 4.6, eco-mobility, and clean energy public transport systems. The car industry carries a major responsibility for undermining clean energy public transport systems and for wasteful investment in expensive road infrastructure. These harms can be brought to an end with greater support for walking, bicycles, clean energy motorbikes, horses, and donkeys as eco-mobility modes of transport. Cities and towns also need to be car-free and provide infrastructure for eco-mobility. Every community needs to be integrated into a mass transit system involving buses, trains, and trams running on renewable energy and hybrid technologies based on local eco-manufacturing. The transportation of goods must also shift to rail. Non-electric cars based on fossil fuels must be phased out. Air and sea transport must also be decarbonized or limited. 4.7, zero waste and simple living. Mass consumption of commodities and celebrity lifestyles are resource-intensive, wasteful, and carbon-centric. Moreover, landfill sites, incineration of waste, and pollution of ecosystems are harmful. Zero waste closes the loop through recycling, reuse, solidarity economy principles, and sustainable design in our economy, so there is less or zero extraction of raw materials. Certain technologies, like single-use plastic, have to be banned. Together with simple living, we can live with minimal resource and carbon footprints.
4.8, eco-social housing, buildings, and transition towns. Many existing homes are not designed to deal with climate extremes. Moreover, many are still homeless in our society, while the rich have golf courses. We need to retrofit existing buildings and homes to handle more heat and weather extremes. Similarly, new homes must be designed as part of eco-communities, villages, towns, municipal rental schemes, and cities, where construction methods use natural methods, have minimal impact on the environment, and provide for eco-social land needs of individuals as part of a community. Such needs are for housing, agroecological food production, sustainable water use, biodiversity, child rearing, and culture. Cement is not used in this context, given its huge carbon footprint, and has to be phased out as a building technology. 4.9, beyond mainstream economies. The assumptions that economics makes about human behavior, nature, profits, markets, commodities, and growth is destroying everything. Mainstream economics merely justifies the wealth for a few, their destructive use of resources and resulting pollution and carbon emissions. Our economies have to serve our needs as socio-ecological beings and the needs of ecosystems. We need an economics that takes into account ecological footprints, happiness, well-being, the resilience of ecosystems through regular audits, the commons and planetary boundaries. Our economics must be orientated around concepts and tools that assess the state of all living creatures and ends the harm to humans as well as non-human nature. This should serve as the basis of agenda setting, policy, resource allocation, and democratic planning.
4.10, the rich must pay their ecological debt. The wealthy in our societies have consumed resources excessively, negatively impacted on ecosystems, and have huge carbon footprints. They owe us all an ecological debt and have to carry the financial burden of the deep, just transition. This means a climate debt tax for the rich, high taxes on airline travel, private jets, luxury vehicles, and electric cars, a progressive carbon tax targeting polluting corporations and not phasing out carbon fast enough, and climate justice tariffs on carbon criminal corporations and governments. Workers need to leverage pension and provident funds through worker control to ensure the deep just transition meets their needs and support the creation of a national cooperative bank to assist workplaces, communities, and households with the socially owned renewable energy transition and the realization of deep just transition plans. Public finance also needs to be harnessed from eco-taxes, penalties for pollution, withdrawing subsidies to fossil fuels and other progressive taxation sources. 4.11, knowledge is crucial for survival. There is a big knowledge gap in society regarding the worsening climate crisis. We have to draw on different knowledge systems to raise public awareness and survive. Indigenous knowledge has powerful resources to assist us, and it has to be retrieved, learned, and respected. Earth system science, including climate science, is essential to inform the public about the climate crisis and its challenges. Climate science, as people science, has to be complemented by lived experiences based on observing and learning from ecosystems. Given the complexity of climate change, research and innovation to ensure systemic transformation and to advance the public interest must be supported. Universities and schools must take these knowledge challenges on board.
4.12 Emergency, Holistic and Preventative Healthcare. Inequality in healthcare means climate harms will bring injustice, such as during the COVID-19 pandemic. We need workable, accessible, and responsive public healthcare systems to meet people's needs and address the health challenges that come with climate heating. Such healthcare systems must be capable of dealing with emergencies, psychological trauma, diseases, and new epidemics. Holistic care and a preventative orientation at the grassroots have to be strengthened. 4.13 Rights of Nature and Natural Climate Solutions. Our oceans have been polluted, forests destroyed, land stolen, and biodiversity loss increased, all due to the pursuit of profit. If we are to survive, all living creatures need to be respected. All life and all ecosystems on our planet are deeply intertwined and need to exist, persist, and regenerate their vital cycles. The Rights of Nature approach recognizes the intrinsic value of all non-human life forms. Moreover, nature has its own solutions to climate change from which we can learn. Such solutions include conservation, restoration, land management activities that increase carbon storage across forests, wetlands, grasslands, coastal ecosystems, and agroecological farmlands. Community-led biodiversity registers are crucial to protect and advance natural climate solutions. 4.14 Climate conscious media. The media is not informing the public adequately about climate change. It needs to take the science of climate change more seriously and inform the public about the climate crisis, policy issues, and the systemic alternatives required. Climate news has to be mainstreamed in radio, television, and print media.
Section 5, towards a people-driven climate justice state. The South African state has to become a climate justice state that recognizes the climate emergency whilst strengthening our democracy. It has to be guided by the vision, goals, principles, and people-led systemic alternatives contained in this charter, and all its climate policies must be aligned to realize this charter. More specifically, a climate justice state will also 1. Enable participatory planning for deep, just transitions from below. 2. Develop public finance mechanisms such as a public climate insurance fund and green bonds. Provide a climate crisis mandate to the Reserve Bank. Reorientate all public and private finance institutions to support the deep, just transition and advance the tax proposals in this charter. 3. Ensure progressive regulations that will curtail the destructive logic of capital, place limits on corporations, and importantly, place a ban on any future fossil fuel extraction. 4. Decarbonize all state practices and achieve a zero carbon footprint in all its activities. 5. Administratively and constitutionally redesign state structures as parts of the countries become unlivable. 6. Prepare the country for rising sea levels and take appropriate measures as part of participatory planning. 7. Strengthen local government to have enhanced powers and democratize planning competencies to deal with the climate crisis. 8. Develop institutional capacity through a people-led climate disaster management system, which includes a national fire service, fully functional public hospitals, rapid response emergency teams, increased capacity for the weather services, and disaster management infrastructure. And 9, promote research and innovation to deepen systemic transformation for deep, just transitions from below, actively raise public awareness, and ensure all public institutions are climate justice leaders.
5.10. Reduce all wasteful spending and corruption and professionalize the state bureaucracy by appointing the best people in the country to serve in government. A truly non-racial and women-led bureaucracy must be created. 5.11. Advance a climate justice orientation in its international relations, including renewing radical Pan-Africanism through promoting a climate justice position among African governments to demand climate debt reparations from the global north as part of a climate justice justice deal, climate justice sanctions against carbon criminal states, solidarity towards refugees and migrants, research, systemic alternatives, renewable energy pooling, climate disaster response capabilities, and call for an end to fossil fuel treaty in the UN system that benefits African governments. 6. People's power for commoning and a climate justice deal for South Africa. A climate justice future can only be achieved through the power of a united people. We have learned this through the struggle against colonialism, apartheid, and neoliberalism. Power lies in different parts of society, in the systems we build, the organizations and movements that we are part of, and in the street politics we do. People's power has to be at the forefront of defending the living commons which sustains us and future generations. Human beings are an adaptable and flexible species. We understand the causes of the climate crisis, and we have democratic, transformative, and just solutions to prevent our extinction. The Climate Justice Charter is a signpost, a trumpet call, to move all of us in the direction of system change now and for a climate justice deal that ends the suffering of the most vulnerable and oppressed. Such a people-led initiative will ensure that we address the multiple crises confronting the country, while affirming the hope of the many expressed in this charter. Let's take a stand for a caring society and unite in South Africa and through international solidarity before it is too late. Forward to the Climate Justice Charter and deep just transition to sustain life.
So comrades, that was the charter. And as Vish mentioned, it has come out of years and years of resistance by communities, out of campaigning, discussions, research that has been done. And this is now the public and official launch of the charter. So we urge you all and encourage you all to take this back to your communities, to your organizations, and to your networks, and use it as a tool for campaigning as we build the climate justice charter movement together as a collective. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Awande Buthelezi, and I will be chairing the next session, Eco-feminists Speak on the Climate Justice Charter and Struggle. And before we begin, I would like to introduce our speakers. It will be in the order of Ferial Adam, Ella Gandhi, Makoma, Lekalakala, Jacqueline Koch, and Dora Marema. And before we begin, I would just like to briefly go over the bios of our speakers. And I'll begin with Ferial, who has been an environmental justice activist for more than 15 years, who's worked on water, energy, climate change, and she's presently an associate of COPAC. And Ella is a social worker and political activist in South Africa. She retired after serving 2 terms in the South African Parliament representing the ANC. She presently works in an honorary capacity as chairperson of Gandhi Development Trust and Phoenix Settlement Trust, and is a co-president of Religions for Peace International. In February 2020, she received the Papal Medallion from His Holiness Pope Francis. And Makoma is the director of EarthLife Africa, a civil society, environmental justice, and anti-nuclear organization. She's long been active in social movements tackling issues from gender and women's rights, social, economic, and environmental justice issues. In recent years, Makoma has focused on targeting environmental corruption. And Jacqueline Koch is a research professor in the Swab Institute at Wits and professor emeritus in the Department of Sociology. She's an activist academic with a long-standing commitment to environmental justice. She has written extensively on environment, gender, and militarization issues. Her books include The War Against Ourselves, Nature, Justice, and Power, and Writing the Ancestral River, a biography of the Kawi. And Dora has worked with a wide range of NGOs in different sectors, both rural and urban, since 1997. She currently runs Gender CC, Southern Africa Women for Climate Justice, an organization which works with women community-based gender activists and experts from Southern Africa on issues related to climate change. Gender CC has enabled investment into rural areas that has developed affordable solutions to the energy, water, food nexus of rural poor people. Dora recently co-founded the Green Business College, a social enterprise based in Johannesburg, which is dedicated to building entrepreneurs in the green economy by combining green skills with business know-how. And we will have our first speaker, Ferial. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I feel quite honored to be part of this panel of amazing women. I've worked with some of them, and yes, so it's really great to be here. You know, I think that under COVID, I must commend COPAC for continuing the fight on climate change and against climate change and for climate justice. And it's quite clear that if we look at what's been happening in the last few months, that climate change has not been on lockdown. And it's another pandemic upon our heads that we need to actually take up much stronger than we have been. If we just look, you know, there's been fires. There's more fires in California this week. Brazil has fires, there's hurricanes. We're experiencing droughts, there's floods. And with all of that and the pandemic, there still seems to be this absolute denial of climate change happening. So one of the things I picked up this week was that Total, the petrochemical company, wants to build a pipeline through important parts in Africa. So they're looking at crossing 200 rivers and probably 12 protected forests. And you almost want to put your hands up and say, did you not, like, how can you even think about doing that? So I think that we need to, those kind of things are seeping through with COVID, and we need to make sure that we back on track and we stop those kind of events from happening. You know, with all of those impacts, the fires, the hurricanes, the droughts, I think as people were reading the Climate Justice Charter, you would hear all the other impacts that face all of us. But let's be honest, is that women are the shock absorbers of these impacts. They are disproportionately and unjustly affected by the impacts of climate change. And government does acknowledge this. So they'll say this, and they'll say in their introduction of a policy that, yes, women are the most vulnerable. But when it comes to action and policies to actually implement action on climate change, they are completely gender blind. And they do not reflect the urgency that we need to have around these issues. And that is why I think this charter is so important. It is important in so many ways, in that, firstly, and what I like is that this charter has been, over the years, been, you know, it hasn't been a 1 month issue. It's been built, it's had consultations, all of that. And what's been important is, if you read it 2 years ago, you'd think this is pie in the sky. And now with COVID, when you read it, you realize that actually some of the things that are in there are very, very realistic. So importantly, it places the most vulnerable at the center of climate injustice, and that's important. It acknowledges and respects Indigenous knowledge, which is really important in terms of learning from people around you. And we've seen that with COVID, where with the lockdown, people had to look at learning from local experts. It takes the lived experience. For a long time, the poor and, you know, the disadvantaged, when they have been voicing their opinions or voicing their feelings about whether it's pollution, whether it's water restrictions, they're not heard, they're not listened to. And I think this charter basically puts them center of the struggle for climate justice. The issue of work less, live more. I do remember such a lot of discussion about this when it happened. Was really, is that what we're saying? And if we look at COVID, I think it makes absolute sense. We need to take the lessons we've learned under the lockdown and build our movement. So some of the other things that it does is that, which I like about the Climate Justice Charter, is that it moves away from the narrative that women are only victims. And I think that is important. Yes, we know that women are hardest hit. We know that, but we also know that they can be activators. And that is the thing that we need to really build on, and to build the movement using that. And COVID has shown this. If we look at the cooperatives that worked on the ground with regards to food, water, education, all of that on the ground, it just overnight, it blossomed and things were happening. And a lot of them were women-led. We've also realized that through community monitoring, which we used to do a long time ago, and we stopped doing that. But through community monitoring, COPAC was able to develop an amazing water tool, which allowed us to understand what is happening across the country with communities who do not have access to proper and clean water. So those are the kinds of things that are happening on the ground. I think that, you know, it was in the climate justice is quite a bit on water, and I think we need to just, I wanted to talk a little bit about the water issues, because I think that there definitely needs to be a relook at how our water is being managed in this country. Well, mismanaged. I think that we are in for really challenging times. If we look at COVID in itself, at the beginning, when they kept saying, go and wash your hands, and then when we have at least 88 communities through the toolkit that COPAC developed, that they had no water. Some of them did not have water for 3 years. And how are people functioning? The one thing is it was able to put a spotlight on these issues. And if we take that in terms of what's been happening around water, there's the lack of access to water. So I would say more than 60% of South Africa have taps less than 60% of South Africa has taps in their homes. So people have to use standpipes, or they have to walk miles and kilometers to get water. And we know that in terms of women, that's their role. They're walking further and further away as we have droughts and rivers are drying up and becoming polluted. They have to walk further and further away. And that not only impacts on doing anything else like education or being part of having a decent youth growing up, it's also about safety. And women are targeted as they walk to get this water, but it's also the issue of health and sanitation. So there's this whole campaign to provide women with sanitary pads. But if they don't have water, there's an element that affects their health. And I think that those kind of things need to be linked. We can't look at things disjointedly in terms of, oh, water's just about drinking and getting a bucket of water. It's linked to our everyday lives. It's linked to health. And women need to forefront that because it's not being heard. It definitely is not being heard. We also have the issue of our infrastructure in terms of water is totally falling apart across the country. There isn't a place where pipes are not bursting, big holes are not developing around pipes, that sewage is not being spewed out onto streets, and we see that in the Vaal. And yes, you have the South African Human Rights Commission that will go in and hold hearings, but what happens then after that? We still have a very polluted Vaal River. Most of our rivers are polluted. So those are the kind of things that we need to connect to in terms of the Climate Justice Charter. The other thing that we have to guard against is, as we have failing infrastructure, there's a tendency to move towards privatization and commodification of our water resources. And that we need to guard against, because that would just will disempower the majority of the people even more. And, you know, the problem is that increasing droughts, infrastructure falling apart, corrupt government leads to people not having water. And there's a potential for water wars in South Africa. We've written about that. We can see some of that happening with, you know, they basically put it into a big broad banner of service delivery protests. But I think that if we really unpack it, we can see that with climate change getting worse, we're going to have more incidences and protests around food sovereignty, around water, and around health. And I think that most of that would impact women first. And I think that is why we need to put women front and center of the Climate Justice Charter And I think that has been very important in terms of how it was framed. I really am very hopeful about the Charter. The one thing I want to say, and before I end, is that there are such good, deep comments and visions within this Climate Justice Charter that I think that for everyday people to get a better understanding of it, we need to have, it is being translated in different languages, which is great, but I would love for the youth to take the Climate Justice Charter as it stands and to make it into language that the youth would then want to spread it. I think, yes, I agree that everyone has to understand all, the phrases that come, just transition, all of those kind of things. But I do think that we need to communicate it in a way that makes it accessible across the country. And I think that that would be an exciting new part to complement this charter. And I just want to say, final comment is that government has failed us in terms of the policies that they've put into place. It has not really dealt with the issues of climate change. It has appeased big business. And I think that we really need to push this Climate Justice Charter to be adopted in Parliament. I think that is the next step. And I commend all the people who have worked on so hard and tirelessly on the Climate Justice Charter. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your input, Vero. I would now like to call on our next speaker, Ella Gandhi. Thank you.
Thank you. And firstly, I'd like to congratulate COPAC for the wonderful work they have done in producing this charter. It's an excellent piece of work, and I just hope that the government will buy into it. There are many things that women do differently from men, but also there are many responsibilities that are thrust on women by our patriarchal society, which results in us seeing the world from a different perspective. Particularly Black, poor women suffer the worst form of exploitation in our society. Many live in rural areas and often have to fend for themselves and their families on the meager income derived from the rural economy or pensions. This situation makes them vulnerable to climate unpredictability when growing crops or having to pay high prices for food. This makes them even more vulnerable as they often do not have access to the extra funds that are required during these times of hardship. And so they become the hardest hit victims of climate change, drought, and other natural disasters that we are experiencing. But women also bring another way of looking at life. Traditionally, women learned how to resist ill health through nutritious diets, medicinal herbs, and a healthy lifestyle. Our grandmothers taught us the value of discipline, regular meals, meal times, family meals, hygienic habits, and value of the natural resources. I learned from an old aunt in the neighborhood the value of eating blackjack herbs. This is now almost extinct, but in my childhood days, it grew everywhere. Those herbs were rich in iron. Sadly, development paradigm has destroyed the plant almost entirely. There are many such natural fauna and flora that our ancestors valued, but today the so-called development has depleted the open spaces to build, and build. Today, We grow huge tracts of cash crops in place of nutritious food. We grow tobacco so that we can make people addicts and thereby make money. Everything revolves around how we can become wealthy, not how we can become healthy. So I think when we talk about the tradition and looking back at our traditions, I think we should remember that traditionally people looked at how can we build our health, not how we can build wealth. So our thinking needs to change. A simple natural life close to nature will certainly make us healthier. Freshly harvested vegetables are the healthiest, tastiest food compared to the highly processed, sprayed with all kinds of pesticides, foods that we are now consuming. These are lessons we learned in the long, long days ago. And I think we need to bring them back now. So a few days ago, we stressed the thinking about the ice melting and the oceans rising, the climate becoming erratic, with many more natural disasters looming. Our greed is opening up the earth to uncover viruses, such as corona and maybe more to come. But we don't want to frighten ourselves or the world. But, you know, as our young people, like Greta Thunberg said that we are watching you. And I think that that is an important comment that was made by her to us. COVID-19 has in addition shown us that money cannot buy life. That no matter how wealthy one cannot escape the pandemic. That nutrition and clean fresh air and clean water is what we need if we are to survive the pandemic. Yes, one can spend billions on finding vaccines, but we are not looking for long-term sustainable prevention of these kinds of pandemics, which is what the Climate Charter is talking about and which is what we need to pay attention to. So some of the key points that we need to look at are that we need to build a nonviolent lifestyle. Now, when I talk about nonviolent lifestyle, I just want to remind us that not so long ago, just a few days ago, the African women of faith called for an end to small arms production and buying in Africa, because that is being used to promote wars in Africa. And they called for us to stop making them and stop buying them. There was also a research that was done on nuclear proliferation. And if we look at the trillions of dollars that go into the production of nuclear energy, nuclear weapons, and so on, and we look at the harmful effects of all these productions, you realize that that is really time, energy, money, and resources wasted, absolutely wasted. Whereas if we use those resources to provide the necessities of life to all the people in this world, we wouldn't have wars, we wouldn't have so much of poverty, we wouldn't have the misery that we see in some of our areas. So now is the time that we need to begin to look at the world in a different way. Now is the time we need to look at a different philosophy of life. And I think that this charter gives us that new vision to look at the world in a different way. Look at conservation of resources. Look at less consumption and wastage and more sharing and caring. Look at simplicity and not materialism. Look at controlling carbon emissions through economical use of transportation, use of renewable energy, but at the same time curbing the use of energy both in our daily lives and in industries. Do we really need big industries producing so much of stuff and polluting our air, polluting just about everything, the earth, the environment? So we need to encourage green industries. We need to conserve nature and not damage it by burning and destroying it. And I know that we talked about fires. I'm not sure how those fires happen, but often it is said that it is through just clumsiness of people who throw cigarettes without stamping them off, or who throw a matchstick into dry, inflammable or flammable leaves and so on. So let us once again listen to people, young people, just as we heard today, and two very prominent ones are Greta and Malala, who point out that we need to obey some rules strictly, but we also need to break down other rules bravely. So that is my message today. Let us obey some of the rules that we need to obey, and let us break down those rules that we don't need to obey bravely. Thank you very much for inviting me here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those inputs. I would now like to call on our next speaker, Makoma Mikalakala.
Thank you, and thank you very much for inviting me to be part of the Climate Justice Charter in South Africa, the launch of the Climate Justice Charter in South Africa. I must say this is a very rare occasion for me that I find myself sharing a platform with women who have contributed to my activism and growth. I belong to an organization that was spearheaded by the likes of Professor Jackie Koch, who have laid a foundation for environmental justice in our times. Ferial Adam and Dorale Bello, who had inspired and highlighted gender activism in the environmental sector. Hundreds of us have been activated to take action through your interactions. You have shaped our grasps of intersections of gender equality, the rights of nature, and that we are nature, and the importance of sisterhood and solidarity. I'm grateful for that. Ella Gandhi, as a pacifist, you have provided an imaginary of a peaceful world. Your work has contributed in challenging me to work for peace, in challenging the deadly nuclear. As South Africans, we have a particular history with charters. The Women's Charter for Effective Equality developed in 1954 prior to the historic Women's March in 1956. This charter called for a society where women are free from discrimination and prejudice. And the charter was reviewed in 1994 by the Women's National Coalition. And that gave an expression to the diverse experiences, visions, and aspirations of South African women. The other charter that is popularly known is the Freedom Charter. Much has been written about the enduring significance of this document, and this includes its vision for a just social and economic order. And it is said that this charter also influenced South Africa's widely celebrated constitution and the degree to which the changes in this country since the end of apartheid in 1994 have lived up to the ideals of the charter. But then this is very questionable, as after 25 years of the so-called democracy, we still have challenges before us that we thought would have been resolved, or through the charter would have at least highlighted, taken note, and prioritized those so that we can improve our lives. Today, both those charters, amongst many other charters on various issues, hold lessons concerning the importance of inclusive, bottom-up governance and active citizens as the basis for addressing challenges that we face today. The needs and aspirations of South Africans across gender, class, generational, and other lines. But I'm happy to say that the Climate Justice Charter has embraced the core issues of our desires, same as the two charters that I have mentioned. And on the preamble, or what I would say the introduction of the charter, one thing that really caught my attention, and something that really I think this speaks to where we are today. It mentions that it is important for us, or it says a carbon-free society and effective life supporting system mean emancipation for all, including for future generations from the ecocidal system. And we know that a decarbonized development is a struggle of our time, and our historical tasks as South Africans, as humans, and as part of the wider living community. What the Charter brings up, it's the importance of the bottom-up governance and active citizenship in addressing everyday struggles before us. The notion of participatory democracy, I think it's very important, and this is something that we really need to work on and build to incite that active citizenry. We know what kind of life and future we want, so we need to all create a space to activate that, and that can only happen through participatory democracy, and this is very important, I think, in the times that we find ourselves in. What I also like about the Charter is that it identifies the source of the climate disruption. Other people would call it a climate destruction. Other people say it's a climate emergency that we're facing. And this identification of the source of climate disruption clearly says, or it interprets to the fact that fossil fuels, together with a system that allows the destruction of our environment, of our environments, and largely the planet, has got to be challenged. But also what I like about the Charter, it talks about some of the struggles that we are faced with today. It's suggesting a just, transparent transition to a low carbon development that pushes back coal mining for electricity generation due to the externalized costs that are very deadly. That just, transparent transition that the Charter talks about, this is the transition that does not allow uranium mining that creates a radioactive environment. And I think people know that those that are in Johannesburg, we're living in a very radioactive city, so our health is at stake. The just transition that would not allow gas and oil drilling in land and in oceans. And as all we know that our oceans are a barometer of the health of the planet. So if there's destruction there, so we won't be able to have life on Earth. The other important aspect that comes out of the just transition is of the climate charter is a just transition that puts socially owned means of generating electricity as a priority. But I think what is important is that in any form or manner, it will be important that this document is not seen as a slogan shouting document. It should be a living document for those who deem, refer, and use as a guide for disrupting business as usual. What we do today, it's for the future generations. I guess all of us would not like to see a situation as we're experiencing now that may be a precursor of what the future looks like. We have to act, and we have a document that assists us, that guides us to what sort of actions that we have to be involved in. Much of what is envisioned is in the document. It's already happening in various ways and in different communities. But what we see, as Ferial had indicated, we see women at the forefront of some of the actions, whether it's the struggles around adapting to the harsh realities of food sovereignty, of water access, of access to electricity, of zero waste and simply living. We see women in the lead and women providing. Let this document also inspire us that, and inspire those that had not acted for survival of this planet. Let this document be seen as a guide towards a consolidation of a movement to take charge of the moment before us. Let this document provoke an insight and imagination of a carbon-free society. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I would like to call on our next speaker, Jacqueline Cock.
Thank you, Awanda, and thank you for the invitation to speak. I think this is a very important moment because I think it reminds us of how much we share about the kind of world we would like to see. But I think, and that's what the Charter outlines, it's a vision of an eco-socialist world, though it's not explicit about the socialist aspect, which I'll refer to. But I also think it's a very dangerous moment because, well, there are lots of dangers, but what worries me the most is that with living in the midst of all this fear and anxiety and negativity, I think we're in danger of losing confidence in our capacity to build that world, which the Charter outlines, which is a world that I think most of us would like to see. So it's clearly not a blueprint, but it gives us a number of building blocks from which we can build and mobilize. But I think we have to, and I should have said it earlier, I would like to pay tribute, especially to Vish and Jane and Courtney, for the enormous amount of work that's gone into this. So I don't want to sound too critical, but I do want to make a warning noise about how much of that vision and many of those building blocks are being appropriated by negative social forces. And I'm thinking particularly of the central notion of a just transition. Because when it was imported into South Africa by the labor movement in 2010, it had a strong transformative impetus. It was a specifically anti-capitalist document. And it has now been appropriated by powerful forces in our society to simply mean a shift to a new energy regime. And in the process, it has been stripped of much of its transformative potential. So I think there is a struggle, and this charter can be an extremely important source in the struggle to take the idea of a feminist eco-socialism forward. But I think also we have to acknowledge that, well, certainly many of us are wanting a new kind of socialism that is ethical, that is ecological, that is democratic, But for many people, socialism is contaminated by its association with the Soviet Union and its human rights abuses and its destructive impact on the environment. And feminism, to some extent too, is contaminated because it's seen as elitist and divisive. And that is where the eco-feminist movement, I think, is very, very important, because it acknowledges that we are all part of a single ecological community. And by recognizing women's struggles to define a new relationship to nature, we are trying to explode the idea that nature is simply something external to us and just a source of raw materials for economic activity or a sink for our waste products. But to build a movement, I think we have to address these sources, these intellectual sources that have got strong history in our political struggles in South Africa and a lot of international support. But ultimately, it depends on us having confidence. Confidence in the capacity of men and women, and there I'm thinking of very ordinary men and women, because this is not just the task of intellectuals or academics or middle-class people. Confidence in the capacity of men and women to learn from their mistakes, to share, to reason, to cooperate and care for each other. But most importantly, we have to regain a confidence in our capacity to work together to create a more just and equal world. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now I would like to call on our final speaker, Dora Marema.
Thank you so much, Wanda. Thank you for this opportunity, and to everyone that organized this, to Vish, to Jane and Courtney and Awanda and everyone. I also just want to express my gratitude for being able to share this panel with this amazing group of women on whose shoulders I have climbed and I continue to climb. So thank you so much. I think from my side, I am grateful for this day in particular, for the launch of this Climate Justice Charter. I think it is something that many of us have been working and contributing towards. And I think, as Makoma is saying, or as Jackie is saying, it's not a blueprint. It is just a contribution towards this struggle, and something that we should continuously look at, review, and make sure that as things are changing, because we are now in a time where there's a lot of rapid change, that we reflect on to make sure that it is really something that is alive, that will continue to assist many of our communities to be able to adapt to this changing climate, and to keep those who are contributing towards carbon emissions, growing carbon emissions in this country into the straight and narrow. From my side, I'm grateful for the Charter to recognize the issues of gender and issues of women, because for me, I believe that there is no climate justice without gender justice. As we know that, I think, amidst the inputs of the previous speakers, that women are really bearing the brunt of a changing climate. And I think now with COVID-19, we have seen the figures that are coming about a huge number of them that lost their jobs, a huge number of them that are skipping the meals to shield their children from hunger, that we do not lose sight of that picture, that a picture of climate injustice, it is a picture of a woman who has to take the brunt for all of that. But however, on the flip side of it is a huge contribution, unrecognized contribution that many of our women are making towards fighting the issue of global climate change, putting in a lot of work which is not valued, which is not paid for. So definitely women being the shock absorbers to whatever is happening, perpetuated by this climate change. And the key question that we need to ask ourselves is, how are we going to make sure that this picture is changing? How are we going to make sure that women are contributing towards the solutions that are being put as solutions towards reducing reducing the carbon emissions. They have the know-how, they live closest to the environment. They are the ones that are farming in the majority in terms of subsistence farming. They are the ones that are having to struggle to care for the people who are injured during climate disasters. And they have a lived experience that can be tapped on as we work on solutions. And I think it's not only to government, but it's also to the well-established organizations that are yet to embrace the issue of gender justice within climate justice. I think it will be fatally wrong for us to keep on pushing the issue of climate justice and leaving gender justice out of it, because we will run the risk of perpetuating the inequalities and the injustices that are manifesting themselves in many of the vulnerable communities, and that could go unnoticed. And as we are striving for climate justice, that the women will be left behind. So I think for me, I'm excited about this. And as I say, it is an opportune time. It is a time for us to be able to be putting something like this on the table that will galvanize all of us to work together to ensure that we do not solve this issue of climate change with the same mentality that caused it in the first place. What we're looking for is a sense of agency for what our people are facing, for the issues of the poor that are impacted by so many of these pandemics, not only just the COVID-19, but a lot of these pandemics that will be unleashed by this global climate change. And I know that right now people are saying, obviously, they have seen figures and proof that the carbon emissions are really going down with slowed economic activity. I do not know how long this will last, but what I know is that the many disasters that will come with the changing climate may not afford us an opportunity to be able to prevent ourselves, to go and buy the masks, to be able to go and buy the hand sanitizers. And we know who are the people who will continue to suffer. Those are the ones that are vulnerable, the ones that are looking after the weak and the sick. And we need to make sure that this issue of climate change, it doesn't leave our radar. It doesn't leave it doesn't leave our attention, that we really put it squarely, because even though there hasn't been any direct connection that has been made between the COVID-19 and climate change, I believe that with the changing climate, a lot of pandemics will come. And how do we prepare ourselves? How do we prepare our people, especially those with less resources? So I just want to congratulate Vish and everyone that's worked on this charter for a very long time, to be able to now today launch it and hopefully galvanize a whole lot of other people who may not even be here today, and to be able to support it and to be aware of what it contains, and somehow be able to see how we utilize it to mobilize ourselves. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dora, for those inputs. I would just like to apologize to everyone that we are now starting to overrun on time. So I would just like to thank our speakers today for such an engaging and catalytic conversation around the values and principles which carry this climate justice charter forward. And with that, I would like now to move on to our next session on the October 16th National Day of Climate Justice Action, taking the climate justice charter to Parliament. And with that, we'll be guided by Professor Vishwa Satka. Thank you.
Thank you, Awande, and thank you again to our eco-feminist panel. It was very insightful. And again, this is a process of learning and collective learning, and it's a collective intellectual journey for all of us. Thank you. Many of you have asked in the chat line, how do we build this movement? Well, this movement has been in the making, and it's been in the making through struggle. And so the next step, comrades, is to go to Parliament on October 16th this year. It's a national day of action. And the rallying call is end thirst, end hunger, end climate harms. That's the message that we are taking to Parliament. Now, why are we doing this? Why are we going to Parliament? Well, Parliament is where the political representatives of our society sit. But the political representatives of our society have not been taking the climate science seriously. The climate science is saying that Southern Africa and South Africa is a hot spot, meaning we are heating at twice the global average. So currently we are just over 1 degree Celsius heating since the Industrial Revolution, which means we are now at 2 degrees. We are heading for 1.5 degrees. And when 1.5 degrees threshold is overshot at a global level, it means it's going to be 3 degrees heating here in Southern Africa, particularly South Africa. This is a very, very serious issue because this is looming. This is probably going to happen over the next 5 years. And the climate scientists we've been working with are saying that our livestock production, our maize production, etc., will collapse under those conditions. It did during the drought. So we are going to Parliament to say to our parliamentarians, you have to take this issue seriously from the standpoint of science, and you're accountable to us around this issue. And there's a science document that we adopted in the June 16th Assembly. We'll share with you in the chat line. Please also take that into your communities, into your organizations. It was put together by our leading climate scientists. The second reason we're going to Parliament is because our Constitution provides for charters to be adopted to complement the Constitution. Section 234 of our Constitution. So we are saying, let's go and claim that right as citizens to affirm this charter within the core legal structure of our country and to demand that Parliament adopts the charter as per Section 234. The challenge we face, comrades, is that everything we have built in our societies were built during the time of a relatively stable climate. With climate change, the world has changed. And so we really have to transform how we think, and the charter is about that. And that was affirmed by our panel. The third reason why we're going to Parliament, comrades, is to raise awareness. Because Jackie is right, it's a battle of ideas. And we've got to assert our conception of the future we want, the transition we want, and the content we want of that transition. And we've got to amplify a transformative vision. And this is the moment to do it. And so going to Parliament, we are going to be saying this unequivocally, without fear. We're going to say what we want, and we want it now. The last point to make around this, comrades, is that we are going to Parliament so that we can give expression to the voices of the hungry in our society, those that do not have water in our society, those that are ridden with anxiety because they've lost jobs, the young and children in our society who are really concerned about where the world is going. So all of us are going to Parliament. But how are we going to do this? Well, the tactic we are using, comrades, is that we are going to invite the leadership of all the political parties to come and debate with us in a virtual online assembly, led by all the social forces that have been part of this process. The point is this, comrades, is that it's not one minister of environment that's going to solve this problem. No, this is a very big problem. The entire political structure of our society, the political leadership structure of the society has to be confronted with this challenge. And so in that assembly, we're going to invite them to clarify what are their commitments to this major and dangerous challenge we face, and how serious are they about the just transition, and most importantly, taking forward the charter as per Section 234. So that's going to happen, comrades, October 16th, a National Day of Action. And we are saying in this assembly now, and we'll be saying this increasingly, rally with us on that day. In your local community, put up a placard. Let's drop banners down. Let's paint murals. Let's put graffiti on walls. Let's get the message of the Climate Justice Charter out on October 16th. So we wanted to register this with you And it's in this kind of struggle that we will build this movement. But there's many, many more steps in this process. And I'm going to hand over to Courtney Morgan to say more.
Thanks, Vish. So I'm again going to share my screen. So with the help of Amandla.mobi, we have now launched a petition to get the charter adopted by Parliament. So this is the petition. It was just launched last night. We've done some tests. I'm just going to read through it, and then we'll have a little session for signing. So we are petitioning the South African Parliament. The title of the petition is "Together We Can Help Ensure Parliament Brings an End to Water Problems, Hunger and Pollution." We are asking the South African Parliament to adopt the Climate Justice Charter in accordance with Section 234 of the South African Constitution, which provides for charters to be adopted in support of the Constitution. As our elected leaders, you have the power to move South Africa away from coal to solar power. Imagine a country with less asthma because of clean air, less drought, closed taps, and power cuts because our communities own renewable energy power. Imagine a country where no one goes to bed hungry because the greedy polluters are forced to pay the taxes they owe, so everyone can have a basic income grant and the option of a climate job. This is what climate justice looks like. We call on Parliament to show they will put us, the people, first, not the rich, by adopting the Climate Justice Charter. And the complete charter can be viewed at that link, which I've also shared in the chat, and I will share it again. So why is this important? COVID-19 has shown how widespread people's suffering is and why our leaders need to do more. Water tanks were delivered to some communities, but more has to be done. There was strain on social grants, but governments did top-ups. Now, more than ever, if we the people come together in numbers, our elected leaders may have no choice but to listen to us to solve the deeper problems. All over the world, rich people and countries have made money mining and burning coal for power. Using coal, oil, and gas instead of renewable energy, like solar power, is heating our world. So while the rich live in comfort, we, the majority, are hit hardest by droughts and floods. Scientists have warned us that extreme weather like this is going to get worse and worse each year unless we move from coal to renewable energy. Southern Africa, including South Africa, is heating at twice the global average. We are warned that the region will get hotter and drier. Our recent drought is the worst we have ever experienced, with devastating consequences for communities. Our drought, increasing tornadoes, storms, and extreme rainfall flooding all come with increasing costs for society and are impacting more on the vulnerable and the poor, who have not created these problems. In an unequal society, climate harm and injustice is going to be devastating for grassroots women, children, workers, the unemployed, people with disabilities, and poor communities. We also have a climate science document, which Jane has shared the link to. This was prepared by some of South Africa's leading climate scientists and which supports our call to Parliament to adopt the Climate Justice Charter and to act now. We the people can ensure Parliament takes a stand for climate justice. How do we do this? By ensuring our elected leaders take climate science seriously and by securing our commitment to our visions, goals, principles, and people's alternatives for a more just future. Since 2015, communities across South Africa have engaged with the South African Food Sovereignty Campaign to create the Climate Justice Charter. This movement is growing, and together we can make sure Parliament adopts the Climate Justice Charter, which gives us a tool to hold our leaders to account. We will be handing over the climate science document, the Climate Justice Charter, and this petition to Parliament and all our political parties with endorsements from individuals and organizations on October 16th, a national day of action to end hunger, thirst, and more climate harms. Let's make this happen together. Climate justice is social justice. So I will now share the link. And what we wanted to do at this point is just give 1 or 2 minutes for everyone to go to the link and sign the petition right now. And to kick that off, I'm going to invite William, who was one of the youths who read out the charter, to do a live signing of the petition. Thanks. While William is sharing his screen, I also just want to outline that this particular petition is for individuals. I'm going to be sharing another link for a Google form for organizations to endorse. Yeah, thanks. Well, you can
My
go
screen?
ahead. Yes.
Okay, comrades, Amandla, away to Amandla. Now, comrades, the reason I say that is not just because it happens to be the name of this wonderful campaigning tool before you, but also because it is a rallying cry. And what we are beginning today is a moment for rallying. And it's a moment for mobilizing. And although we can't take to the streets like we were once able to, we must ensure that at all times we keep up the energy and the spirit of the streets. So before I sign this petition, and before you all sign this petition, I want you to bear in mind that we are not simply asking people to sign a petition. We are recruiting them for the climate justice movement. We are bringing to them the vision that was outlined this morning by the eco-feminists who spoke. We are preparing them to go to Parliament on October the 16th. So when they sign this petition, it's not just a passive action. It's not something that they do once and it's over and it's the extent of their activism. What we are doing them is recruiting them. We are showing them the beginning of the climate justice movement, and this is the beginning. So I want you to keep that in mind as you go to your homes, as you go to your workplaces, as you go to your schools, and as you go to your communities, to bear in mind that when we ask people to sign this petition, we are not just sharing a link, but we are recruiting them for the climate justice movement. So please all join me in signing this petition. I'll put my name here, I'll put my surname there, followed by my email address, my province, and my cell phone number. You're all welcome to message me if you want to talk about anything. So please click yes to keep up to date with the campaign and encourage others to do so. Like I said, we are beginning the building blocks of a movement to go to Parliament so this charter is adopted, and a movement to realize this climate justice charter. There we go. Pambili climate justice, Pambili. As we go to Parliament on October 16th, let's end thirst, let's end hunger, and let's end climate harms. Forward, comrades, forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Will. That was powerful. I'm not going to say much more because I think you have covered it. But we do urge you to take this petition back to your organizations and your networks. I'm just going to give a couple of minutes for people to sign. From the time that I spoke a couple of minutes ago to now, when we just had 7, we are now already on 39 signatures. So thank you, comrades, and please keep signing. I see there's a question from Janet. Yes, if you just click on the link, it should open in another tab.
Which link?
The link in the chat, I'll send it again. Okay, I've just shared the link again. Everyone can go to that link and you should be able to sign. And comrades, we have just hit 100 signatures. Thank you so much for signing. Please keep signing, please keep sharing. But for now, I think it's good to move to the next session. But please keep signing and sharing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Courtney and Will. And I'm very confident that we will continue moving up in those numbers as we go on to our next session, which will be on the Climate Justice Charter tools for grassroots organizing. And I'd like to call on my colleague, Jane Cherry. Thank you, Jane.
Thanks, Awande. And thanks to everyone for signing and for joining us today at this launch of the Charter. So I'm going to share with you some of the tools that we have developed to accompany the Charter. There are 4 tools. Let me just make this bigger. There we go. And these are tools for grassroots organizing. So the first one is, of course, the Climate Justice Charter. Courtney has shared the link in the chat. I'll also show you the website where you can easily access this charter. And just to say, we are getting it translated. So the first phase is to get it translated into 5 languages. At the moment, we've got 2 up on the website, English and Zulu. So yeah, keep an eye out on the website for more translations of the charter. The second tool that I want to introduce to you is the introductory guide. And this is a guide to accompany the charter. So it includes part 1, which is just a brief introduction to why we're presenting this guide. We've got a brief background to the charter, a little bit about understanding climate change, and this has been derived from the climate science document that Vish spoke about, and then also a glossary, because there are some terms that some people might not understand, and as a climate justice charter movement, we really need to start sharing and understanding what these terms are. And then part 2 looks at the charter. So we do have, the charter is included in this guide, but then it is accompanied with some illustrations, as I'll show you some of now, and also some stats on how big the issues are around climate, but also some stats around the alternatives. So here's just an example on the left of some of the glossary terms. So we look at commons and commoning, what is a cooperative, deep just transition. So all of these are mentioned in the charter, and we try and elaborate on them so that we can get a better understanding. And then when it gets to the alternatives, this is quite exciting. We had an illustrator draw for us what these alternatives look like, but this illustrator has shown us on the left what the problem is, and then on the right, the alternatives. So you can see for 4.2, socially owned and community-based renewable energy. On the left there, we've got coal, nuclear, deep sea drilling, fracking, and all of that. And on the right, we've got the alternatives. You can see the same for the food sovereignty one, the water commons one, and then enjoy life one. Here's a few more of these illustrations. I think they're really great, and these are also a great way of getting these ideas out to youth as well and children. So these are all available in the introductory guide, and I'll show you where you can access that a bit later. The third tool is the climate science pamphlet. So this is derived from the climate science document. It's a 2-page pamphlet, which is easy to download, easy to share. We really try to make it understandable what climate change is and how it is affecting South Africa. So you'll see the different topics. What is climate change? Why is Southern Africa climate change hotspot? What extreme weather impacts can South Africa expect? The implications of climate change for South Africa, and then how we are responding to climate change. And then a figure there, which is really quite interesting, projected increases in temperature over Southern Africa under different levels of global warming. And then the fourth tool, which we have just launched as well, is the endorsement of the charter, so the petition. And on our website, you'll also be able to find the link to sign the petition. And then that takes me to the next slide, which is our website. So this is what the website currently looks like. If you go to www.safc.org.za, you'll be able to click on that green tab there, which is Climate Justice Charter. And there you'll be able to find the charter, the endorsement tool, the intro guide, which has been uploaded, and the climate science pamphlet. So this is what the website currently looks like, and we are hosting everything on the SAFC website. We're in the process of developing a climate justice charter movement website, which will not only be to host the tools, but we really want to make a more interactive way of showing the Climate Justice Charter and the alternatives, but also have a space for organizing and mobilizing around the Climate Justice Charter and for climate justice. So stay in touch with us and we will let you know when this website is launched. And then just to mention that these are tools not just for you to read, not just for you to sign up, as Will said, but also to deepen the Climate Justice Charter movement. So we encourage you to download them, share the links on social media, share the links with all your friends, family, comrades in your organizations. Share the climate science pamphlet, get others to endorse the charter, and help us grow this movement so that people can understand what climate change is, why we need this climate justice charter. And then finally, just to mention, a lot of this isn't really accessible to many in our country. So we are working on printing the charter in all the different translated versions, printing the intro guide and the climate science pamphlet. If you would like to also print some, you're welcome to reach out to us and we can send you the printable versions. And if you would like some in your communities, also reach out to us and we'll see how we can get some to you. Right, thanks. That's all from me. Thanks, Awande.
Thank you, Jane. And now I would just like to move on to the way forward. But before doing that, I would just like to thank everyone again for taking the time to be here today and joining us on this launch. This is actually a very important moment in our history moving forward as we come together to actually take this step forward. I would like to thank the youths who read the charter earlier. I think that was a very powerful and important vision for us to see intergenerational movements in its formation right now. And I also like to thank our speakers earlier, our eco-feminist speakers, who've really helped light that fire. I hope they've lit that fire in you as they have in me. And I'd just like to echo some of the words that they said with regards to how we should guard against the logic of privatization as a response to the failures that we've seen in our society, and that the Climate Justice Charter acts as a way in which us as people, as citizens, can bring our own solutions and way forward to how we deal with this oncoming crisis. And also that there can be no climate justice without gender justice. So I'd like to thank the women who have been instrumental in the creation and shaping of the Climate Justice Charter, the leaders in our movement that we're hoping to build around this charter, this living document which will help guide our transformative vision for the future. And I emphasize transformative vision as we must guard against the forces that would seek to dilute the values and spirit of this charter, for us to help maintain, for these forces who would seek to maintain the unequal structure of our society and our economy. I would also just like to make known that on the 17th of September, we will also be convening a Climate Justice Assembly to prepare for, to make preparations for Parliament on October 16th. And with that, I would just like to hand over to Jane for a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Awande. So I'm just going to say a vote of thanks and then we will be done with this launch. So first, I would like to say a big thank you to our funders. First, the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation and the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, RLF for funding the web platform and the data for us to take part in this webinar today, and FES for funding the charter development process. This is the third year that FES has supported this initiative, which started out as a discussion around water and water justice. And so thank you to both these funders. They've both been really integral in this climate justice charter process and related events. Second, a special thanks to all of those who've been part of this process from the very beginning. And these are activists in the South African Food Sovereignty Campaign who have been part of our food sovereignty, drought, and climate justice campaigning. They've been with us at drought marches, drought speakouts, bread marches, at local events. And so thanks to them. Thank you also to all those organizations and activists who contributed to this process at the various engagements and workshops. So this includes the youth, labor, faith-based organizations, climate justice, and social justice organizations. And a special thank you to the few dedicated climate justice journalists on the ground who've been covering the process and climate change issues on the ground. Thank you also to all the speakers for taking your time to be with us today and for sharing your deep knowledge and insights with us, and to the youth for joining us today, but also taking time to pre-record the reading of that charter. I think it's really wonderful to hear the young voices speak words of hope in the form of the charter. And then a big thanks to the COPAC team, Courtney, Vish, Awande, and volunteers and associates like William and Ferial, and others who have also assisted in this process to bring the charter together. A special thanks to Tiamo also for editing that video of the youth. And then finally, a big thanks to all of you for participating in this charter process, for attending today, and for supporting this process. We look forward to journeying with you to deepen this climate justice movement in South Africa. And please do keep in touch with us over social media, and we'll update you, as I said, once the website is up and running. And we're also going to update you on the process of our Parliament engagement and other events related to the Charter and the movement. And just a reminder, if you haven't signed the petition, please pass it on to your friends and comrades. And then just to mention, finally, we are recording this event. We will upload it to the COPAC YouTube page, and it is also streaming live on Facebook, so it'll be available there. All right, thanks again to everyone for joining us. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time, possibly over Zoom, and hopefully one day in person. Thanks, everyone.